Pelliper is one of the best competitive Pokemon in history, summoning biblical floods as soon as it enters battle to support its teammates. But what if I told you Pelliper wasn't always like this? In fact, Pelliper used to be just a crappy bird. In fact, it's not even a regional bird, just a common pelican. Pelliper actually had an insane glow up, and today we're going to look over Pelliper's journey in competitive Pokemon to see how the biggest glow up in Pokemon history came to be. How did Pokemon turn this beach hazard into their own Neville Longbottom, going from the easy target for bullies at school to the ultra hottie mega babe heartthrob that is sought after by every other water Pokemon? Let's find out, starting with Pelliper's humble origins. Pelliper was slumming it up in the lowest tier of each generation, and if you think that taking 4 generations to become viable isn't really that long, let me put things into perspective. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, Pelliper's debut, came out in 2002. Sun and Moon, where Pelliper's career really took off, was released in 2016. That is almost 15 years of just pure L's. In its debut of Generation 3, Pelliper was simply unusable. It served zero purpose, as it was just outclassed by every other water type, always picked last during gym class. It may share Gyarados' typing, but unlike Gyarados, it doesn't have any of the bulk or power to compensate for getting one-shot by a Pichu. As its freshman years passed it by, Pelliper remained utterly useless in the lowest singles tier, never used, of Gens 4 and 5, where it was more or less a generic hit taker, and a bad one at that. The most meaningful thing it did there was receive Rain Dish from Gen 5's Dream World, establishing its relation to Rain that probably planted the idea for it to get Drizzle later on, and thus make Game Freak appear to be subtle masters of foreshadowing. However, Pelliper wasn't the first lowly Pokemon to gain one of the most incredible boosts imaginable by virtue of receiving the ability previously seen as Kyogre's signature, something that must never venture outside the Uber tier. But before we get to who stole Pelliper's thunder, I sure wish I could glow up my Pokemon card collection. I don't even own a slab or a Pelliper card. But fortunately, this video is sponsored by Arena Club. Arena Club is the best place to go to bid, sell, trade, or purchase high-graded slabs of cards. There are many auction websites that sell slabs, but Arena Club is the only one that integrates one of the funnest parts of collecting cards into their system, which is trading. One of my favorite features of this website is if you obtain a card on Arena Club, it is transferred to your showroom, where you can either retrieve it right away, or you can use it to trade cards with other users. It's almost like it stays digital until you tell Arena Club to send it to you. It's very safe and easy. And also, unlike other auction websites, there's no buyer's premium, there's no hidden costs. What you bid is what you pay for, period. Arena Club is the most trusted name in the card collecting hobby and is backed by Hall of Fame baseball player Derek Jeter. They have graded cards from every grading company you can think of, especially PSA. In fact, I use their website to obtain a card that I've always wanted as a kid. That's right, a PSA graded Gyarados. I was so happy to score this, you have no idea. Alright, look, I was around when the base set released as a kid, but I wasn't lucky enough to get any of the rare cards, so this is a long time coming for me. This is the future of the card collecting hobby, and I'm all for it. So if you want to buy or sell some sick Pokemon slabs and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can go to arenaclub.com/fallswipe to start bidding, trading, or selling. And thank you so much to Arena Club for sponsoring this video. In Gen 5, another previously passed over Pokemon named Politoed received the ability and permanently defined that generation of standard play, for better or ill, completely warping not just the metagame, but the rule set around it, no matter how many attempts to cramp its style the player base dreamed up. There are always going to be jealous types when someone becomes cool out of nowhere, after all. We had several other excellent contenders vying for Pelliper's Glow Up throne, and Politoed was one of the closest to the finish line, but ultimately for us, it falls just short. Why? Because Politoed was a rich kid who reached the age of being able to play with their parents' money. First of all, Politoed wasn't as lowly as Pelliper was beforehand. It was nowhere near a good Pokemon, of course, but as far as bland water types went, it was okay. It was certainly a far sight better than Pelliper, with which it shared Gen 4 NU. In that tier, Politoed was quite good, whereas Pelliper only avoided being untiered by virtue of that distinction not yet existing. It was terrible, plagued by all the mediocrity of the aforementioned bland water type affliction, colloquially referred to as Luminion syndrome. But Pelliper was different. It was even worse. A Stealth Rock weakness on an already unimpressive Pokemon will do that for you. A lower tier Gyarados certainly wasn't. At least Mantine had Swift Swim and enormous special defense to work with. Pelliper had Jack. Yeah, Roost U-turn, but in service of what? It's not like it could answer much of anything. Second, Gen 5 Politoed had the benefit of Permanent Rain, a field effect so overpowered it got nerfed in the following generation. Without permanent rain, yeah, Politoed still had a niche in Gen 6 OU, but it was seriously limited. A once-in-a-while near gimmick. Not exactly unviable, but not something you rely on in crunch time either. A world apart from its previous stature. In Gen 5, Politoed was incredibly reliable at repeatedly switching in and keeping the rain going because, especially with the further assistance of Protect, it could stick around long-term through its leftovers. And with such longevity in the attrition-based weather war, and just as importantly, once the rain was up, it was up. Until it was changed by opposing weather, of course, but you didn't have to worry about it running out. This meant you weren't exactly in a rush to get your rain abusers on the field. You didn't have to force any awkward switches directly from Politoed to the big sweeper, because if you didn't get it on the field quick enough, there'd be no rain left to abuse. Now in Gen 6, Politoed has to hold Damp Rock to extend the rain, meaning its survivability was next to nil, meaning you had quite an awkward time trying to get it on the field for repeated rain assaults, especially when paired with that other Grecian-level tragedy of it now only setting rain up for limited periods. And its awkward generic water presence meant it wasn't exactly seamless in setting up early for the abusers it was supposed to enable. Tyranitar already had enough trouble getting Excadrill on the field with multiple sand turns, and Tyranitar switched into practically everything. Politoed switched into, well, not nothing, but much, much less when it wasn't healing with leftovers, and wasn't exactly drawing in Pokemon that enabled switch-in opportunities for the likes of Mega Swapper and Kingdra, no matter how threatening they were. And that is what makes what Pelliper did so impressive. It had all the same issues, and on top of that, it also had a Stealth Rock weakness. One might remember the drought-setting Ninetales and the village it took to support its complete lack of longevity in the face of the sneaky Pebbles. What did Pelliper do upon receiving Drizzle in Gen 7? It launched Rain back to OU stardom, that's what. Rain wasn't just a more viable style now, it was downright excellent. It was so good, it became a default pick for many, a comfort choice, a safe option, just as consistent and dependable as any more traditional team style hanging on old reliables like Landorus Therian. In fact, it was so spam, it became controversial. Some found it was almost too good sometimes, to the point of arguably being cheap. The advantages it had were too major, and make no mistake, this never happens with Politoed as the setter. Yes, Gen 7 brought new abusers like Ash Greninja, but without a reliable rain setter, you're better off just using one of the many regular teams with Ash Greninja. So then you have to wonder what exactly Pelliper had that launched the playstyle into stardom. Turns out it was many things. Remember how we said in Gen 4 NU it had Roost and U-turn, but in service of what? Well, here it is. Pelliper now employed these major game changers to this, its highest calling, and did so spectacularly. U-turn was the game changer, even with its Stealth Rock weakness. More on that in a second. This meant that Pelliper could capitalize on a force switch with laser precision. It could see what the opponent brought in so the perfect answer could switch in, and safely at that. On a high-risk, fast-paced style like Rain, where every turn was crucial, this was invaluable. No more awkward, risky double switches like the kind Politoed forced. Nope, now thanks to Pelliper, you unmistakably brought the right Pokemon into the right position. Okay, so what about the Rock's weakness? Well, that's where Roost came in. And this form of reliable recovery offset Rock's and Pelliper's inability to run leftovers, allowing it to stick around to repeatedly set Rain much more easily. And the upside of that Rock weak flying typing was an incredible immunity to none other than Earthquake. Being immune to spikes was great too. After all, Politoed risked taking more than 25% per switch in the face of rocks and multiple layers of spikes, as it often had to contend with when letting in Ferrothorn. Pelliper took it a step further. It could actually defog those spikes away itself. That's right, we're just getting started. Pelliper had much more than just Roost and U-turn to launch it miles ahead of Politoed, such as Indeed Defog. Rain's defogging was primarily a task for Tornadus Therian or Kartana, but they usually weren't alone. Pelliper would also defog, further helping its team and its own Stealth Rock weakness. Alternatively, Pelliper could dip further into its superb, impactful move pool. Knockoff was always a good option, removing items like Toxapex's Black Sludge to make it easier for its teammates to break through defensive cores, but its real weapon was its other benefit of that Stealth Rock weak typing, a secondary stab, Hurricane. This, in conjunction with Gen 7's lowly plus 10 boost to its base special attack, meant Pelliper was strangely, threatening? Yes, that's right, threatening. Even with special attack investment, Hurricane hit quite hard, and that 30% confusion rate could potentially make things quite messy for even opponents that didn't particularly take a lot of damage from it, especially in conjunction with that other wonderful 30% proc rate move in Pelliper's arsenal, Scald. Being able to always, or almost always anyway, throw around perfect accuracy hurricanes by virtue of summoning the necessary rain for yourself was also uniquely wonderful. Hurricane wasn't just a matter of power either, but coverage as well, as it meant you couldn't safely throw grasses into Pelliper, funnel Funnily enough, Pelliper's dual stabs alongside its solid special attack meant that if the Rain team was willing to function outside of Rain more often, which, with how good its staples were as Pokemon outright, wasn't much of a challenge, they could reap the benefits of Specs Pelliper, which was frailer, lacked longevity, and was thus less reliable in setting up Rain even outside the whole part where it didn't hold Damp Rock. But what it did do was threaten immediate KOs, and that speaks the language of Rain teams with perfect eloquence. Its Hydro Pump severely threatened nearly all neutral targets, as Specs Rain Hydros tend to. But the really beautiful part was how many Water Resist struggled to safely absorb the Hydros because they were utterly terrified of the Specs Hurricane accompanying them. This was most notable in the case of two of the tier's most common grasses, especially defensive Tapu Bulu and Assault Vest Tangrowth, whose Hydro tanking ability would be for naught if they allowed a Hurricane to blow them away, especially since Pelliper had the terrifying Ash Greninja in the back. The specially defensive Komodo that became popular later in the generation had the exact same problem. It wasn't just the flying weak Water Resist that had to watch out either. Ferrothorn, Tapu Fini, and even the mighty Toxapex didn't take kindly to Pelliper's mighty Specs Hurricanes. In the same vein, Hurricane was also quite spammable, as common flying resists like Magearna, Tapu Koko, and especially Heatran didn't want to go anywhere near those Hydros, and neither did Pelliper's main weather competition, Tyranitar. The dual stab combination was so good, one could even run an offensive Damp Rock Pelliper. The bulk and longevity physically defensive set was a standard for good reason, but with an offensive variant, Pelliper could still threaten its stabs while also providing extended range for its teammates. Plus, not locking into a move with Specs meant that, for example, if Tapu Bulu or Tangrowth switch into Hydro, they weren't necessarily safe, as it'd still have to switch in for fear of the follow-up Hurricane. And if Pelliper ever wasn't sure what to do, U-turn could cover everything. Even though Specs Pelliper paled in comparison to its defensive standard, the fact that it could, and in many instances did, destroy OU with such a set was just incredible. Regardless of the set, it was a tremendous force. At one point, players were making gentlemen's agreements to play certain tournament games without Rain, since it was such a pain to prepare for. That is how overwhelmingly powerful the Pelliper-led playstyle was at one point. It became one of the metagame's foremost playstyles. Basically, the cool rebel gang became accepted by the mainstream for how cool it was, and it was almost all thanks to their charismatic leader. The best part is, Pelliper didn't stop there. Gen 8 meant Rain no longer had Mega Swampert, Ash Greninja, or Z moves, but still had to contend with Toxapex and friends. And yet, Pelliper was OU once again. Early on, it was propelling the ludicrously broken Dracovish and its already over-the-top Fishish Ren to earth-shattering proportions. But then Dracovish got banned, and Pelliper no longer had such a busted threat on its side, yet continued to thrive, functioning just as it had before its enabling of new beasts like the terrifying Barraskewda and the newly buffed Zapdos, now brandishing both Hurricane and Weather Ball. Even Tapu Lele, a Pokemon you normally wouldn't associate with Rain, joined the fun, abusing Pelliper's Rain to throw out brutal Specs Thunders that completely destroyed the Slowking and Corviknight that thought themselves safe pivots. Tapu Lele's wall-breaking excellence gave its Rain-abusing teammates free, Rain to fully lead into that classic strength of Rain's, outspeeding and bowling over even the fastest offense teams. Pelliper was even used in Gen 8 Ubers, and yes, there was no Kyogre around at the time and the dex was limited, but that still seems insane. After all, there were plenty of monstrous legendaries around even the Dexit world. Pelliper seemed way out of its depth trying to hang with them, or so it would have you think. This was a time when Dynamax was allowed in the tier, and the metagame was incredibly volatile as a result. Remember how Rain outspeeds and bowls over even the fastest offense? Of course you do. We just mentioned it. So we see how in this tenacious Razor's Edge metagame, Pelliper's Rain winds up being a major tool. It supported Dracovish, of course, allowing both Ban and Scarf sets to perform truly unreal feats. Ban deleted just about everything, while Scarf had absolutely outrageous strength for something of its speed. Pelliper was more than just a Fishious Ren maxing tool, too. It was also superb support for the most vicious Dynamax abusers in the tier, as well as Gigantamax Dreadnought. Oh, and that's not all. Beyond fueling some of the most frightening offense around, Pelliper's Rain was a critical element of the Weather War defensively, as its presence provided one of the best tools in taking on both Sand teams with Tyranitar and Excadrill, and Sun teams with Torkoal and Charizard. Pelliper was such a major part of the tier, in fact, it was placed in the same viability ranking tier as Mewtwo. That's it, really. You have your glow up from that alone. From not hacking it in NU to sharing a rank with the original Uber, it doesn't get better than that. And yet, Pelliper has continued to thrive in Gen 9, even though it lost to Fog and is under threat of being ravaged by power creep. But with the Paradox Pokemon being as strong as they are, especially when Sun is involved, Rain has taken a step back. Yet it's still powerful precisely because of how it interferes with not just Sun, but Alola Ninetales of Snow as well. And of course, the way it enables not just Barraskewda, but a terrifying Paradox Pokemon of its own, Raging Bolt, which unleashes wickedly powerful weather balls that synergize gorgeously with its stab. The fact that Pelipper is still succeeding in Gen 9 today, despite the deck having become so stacked against it, is amazing. And not being able to defog against Hisui and Samurott as it otherwise do so aptly is so sad, but yet it perseveres. However, it did more than that in UU. Just when you thought, alright, this kid had their time, they weren't even that cool anyway, nah, Pelipper didn't even thrive. It went beyond in enabling of arguably its most destructive guys yet. If you're going to stick me in UU, Pelipper promised, you're going to pay. And it delivered on that promise spectacularly. It brought with it some old friends, Barraskewda and Zapdos, and wreaked havoc to the point where the player base began to complain a lot. Like a lot. Yes, even rain-weak teams could now naturally adapt more easily with defensive uses of Terra, but rain teams could also explode out of control with Terra of their own. It wasn't just the Barraskewda Zap combo either. Though the former's absurd flip turn pressure with the nigh unwallable Zapdos already did way too much on its own, the two pairing up to be just about everything. Yet there was more. Further recalling previous generations, Greninja and Keldeo went from good to insane in the mem rain. Players were going out of their way to stack things like Hydrapple, Slowking, and Tyranitar, and rain still threatened the daylights out of them. Its presence in the tier was overwhelmingly detrimental, constricting the team builder and making for awful battles where the matchup dictated pretty much everything. The rain team would often just brute force their way through everything, and the opposing team would try to hope they could nab the Terra on one turn to save themselves. Real healthy stuff. Rather than any Pokemon or combination of Pokemon, the most consistently effective answer to rain was to hope you just didn't run into it to begin with. And as time went on and the player base realized just how absurd rain was, this strategy too lost effectiveness, as rain got more and more popular until suddenly it was everywhere. Pelipper mirrors all over the place. Utter chaos. The metagame warped in its own image. This was its magnum opus, to make the tier so completely its own, and not just that, it did this so effectively that Pelipper got banned from UU. No, not Drizzle, Pelipper. Where is UU Rain without Pelipper? Non-existent. Politoed can't come close to matching it. It's all in the setter. This is the most direct one-to-one contest they've had so far, and once again, Pelipper had walked away with a stunningly uncontested victory. But just like an infomercial, wait, there's more. That was just Pelipper's journey through singles. Now we must focus on the official competitive format VGC, at which Pelipper has also excelled at ever since Gen 7, which should be no surprise, but it has reached another tremendous apex in Gen 9, where at times it actually got used more than Kyogre. Going head-to-head with Politoed and winning is one thing. Getting used in Kyogre's tier when Kyogre isn't around is another. This would already be an impressive achievement if Pelipper was used even with Kyogre around. After all, the obvious boon is Pelipper being able to set rain without being a restricted Pokemon. Then you remember it's also Kyogre. It's practically the first thing that pops into mind when you think restricted Pokemon, but actually beating Kyogre in usage, as Jimothy Cool might say, this is well and truly insane. Bonkers even. So how did David beat Goliath? First off, Pelipper's flying typing is superb. Its lack of grass weakness and Stab Hurricane means it deals with Rillaboom beautifully. It also helps massively against other major threats in Urshifu and Zamazenta that would threaten Kyogre. With Weather Ball, it has a much more reliable high damage water move and coverage than Hydro Pump. If the rain is ever swapped to Sun, Pelipper now has a fire move too. Second, Pelipper is an excellent team player, able to provide the invaluable tailwind to let fellow teammates tear the other team apart with doubled speed. Third, and probably most important, it also has the amazing utility of Wide Guard. This is absolutely enormous in a format dominated by mighty attacks like Calyrex Shadow's Astral Barrage, Groudon's Precipice Blades, Calyrex Ice's Glacial Lance, and even Kyogre's own Water Spout and or Origin Pulse. Being able to stifle these is game-breaking. Finally, with only one restricted Pokemon allowed per team, flexibility in such a slot is indeed enormous. Kyogre may be Kyogre, but there are plenty of other Kyogre-level restricted Pokemon that you might want to use while maintaining Rain. This is how you can have a Rain core with Calyrex Ice, for example, a popular Pelipper partner which enjoys how the Rain assists it against the one and only Incineroar. Beyond the usage, Pelipper also has some serious achievements. Most notably, at 2024 Worlds in Honolulu, Yuta Ishigaki came in second with his Pelipper Calyrex Ice team. That was in Regulation G. In Regulation H, where there are no restricted Pokemon or legendaries, Pelipper continues to excel with its best friend Archaludon. They are almost always used together and are scaling the usage stats en route to constant success. And it seems no matter the format, Pelipper is well and truly superb. It is unmistakably clear. Pelipper has indeed received the greatest glow up in competitive Pokemon history. And thank you so much to our platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Megamon VGC, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Pretzel SP, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu for their major support of our videos.